There's a moment in every woman's life when she stops looking for permission to be herself. That moment doesn't come wrapped in applause or dressed in someone else's validation. It comes in silence, in solitude, in the raw ache of being unappreciated, overlooked, or misunderstood. And from that silence, something begins to rise in her. Not rage, not revenge, but detachment. Let me be clear, detachment is not indifference. It's not about shutting your heart or turning cold. It's about finally realizing what deserves your energy and what doesn't. It's the art of caring deeply while refusing to lose yourself in the process. Detachment doesn't mean she stopped loving, it means she started loving herself more. As women, we're taught to hold on, to nurture, to fix, to give endless chances in the hope that love will eventually recognize our worth. We internalize that staying is strength, that tolerance is love. But there's a quiet kind of courage that no one prepares us for, the courage to let go, the courage to walk away, not because you don't care anymore, but because you've realized you matter too. Detachment begins the day she looks at herself in the mirror and says, "I'm enough." Not because someone told her, not because she was finally chosen, but because she saw her own reflection and believed it. That's when the shift happens. That's when she stops begging for presence, attention, or affection. She stops asking why someone couldn't see her value. Instead, she starts asking why she ever doubted it herself. And here's the thing about a woman who detaches: she doesn't announce it. There's no dramatic goodbye, no closure ceremony. She simply stops showing up where she isn't respected. She stops explaining herself to people committed to misunderstanding her. She stops making herself smaller to be digestible. The woman who detaches learns to protect her peace like a sacred ritual, because she's tasted what it's like to live in chaos, to be stretched thin trying to prove she's worth keeping. And she refuses to go back there. Detachment isn't a lack of love. It's the realization that love, real love, doesn't require you to abandon yourself. When a woman detaches, she reclaims every piece of herself she gave away to people who didn't know what to do with it. Her time, her energy, her softness, her voice, she gathers them like fragments of a masterpiece, not broken, just scattered. And she rebuilds. And maybe people around her won't understand the shift. They'll say she's changed, that she's colder now, harder, but she's not. She's clearer about what she deserves, clear about what she's no longer willing to tolerate, clear about the fact that peace is a decision, and she's finally made it. What they don't realize is that detachment didn't make her less emotional, it made her more powerful. Now she feels everything, but she's mastered the art of not reacting to everything. She has boundaries, standards, not walls but filters. Her love isn't gone, it's just no longer available on discount. This kind of power doesn't come overnight. It comes after nights of questioning, of doubting, of wishing things could be different. It comes after realizing that the hardest person to leave behind is the version of yourself that kept accepting less. That's the real goodbye. That's the real detachment. She's not angry. She's not bitter. She's not trying to prove anything. She's simply done confusing attachment with loyalty. She's done believing that holding on is always heroic. Sometimes the most powerful thing a woman can do is release what's pulling her down, even if she once thought it was love. And the beauty of detachment is that it doesn't scream. It whispers. It whispers, "You've outgrown this." It whispers, "You don't need to shrink for anyone." It whispers, "Your healing matters more than being understood." There is a sacred kind of power in silence. It's not the silence of weakness, not the silence of submission, but the silence of knowing exactly who you are and not needing to shout it into the world. Because when a woman truly knows her worth, she doesn't argue for it. She doesn't beg to be understood. She lets her absence explain everything her presence was taken for granted for. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is say nothing. Not out of fear, but out of control. Control over your emotions, your reactions, your energy. A woman who chooses silence has already weighed the noise and decided that peace is more valuable than being right. There's no point in screaming into deaf ears. There's no point in proving yourself to someone who has already made up their mind. There comes a time when explaining becomes exhausting and silence becomes clarity. When she goes quiet, it's not because she has nothing to say. It's because she's already said everything. With words, with actions, with tears, with loyalty, and none of it was heard. Silence becomes the final sentence, not because she gave up, but because she outgrew the conversation. She understood that her voice deserves more than being wasted on someone who listens only to respond, not to understand. Silence is strength because it doesn't need validation. It doesn't need a response. It doesn't seek attention. It holds its ground without needing to make a scene. It doesn't perform, it just is. And that kind of quiet unnerves people who expect you to fall apart loudly. They don't know what to do with a woman who walks away without throwing stones. They can't comprehend a woman who doesn't play the victim, doesn't beg, doesn't chase, doesn't scream, just walks, just disappears, just closes the door softly without slamming it. The woman who chooses silence has learned the cost of wasting words. She's learned that not everyone deserves access to her vulnerability. That some people listen just to find cracks in your armor, not to help you heal. She's learned to keep her peace sacred, guarded not by walls but by wisdom, because the world doesn't always reward loudness. Sometimes it respects stillness. Sometimes it's the quietest person in the room who holds the most power. And silence isn't passive, it's active restraint, it's discipline, it's the ability to witness chaos and not feed into it. To feel anger and not let it dictate your reaction. To know that you could hurt back, but you won't. Because silence isn't about losing your voice. It's about choosing when and where to use it. It's about not giving away your energy to battles that aren't worthy of you. There's a kind of peace that comes from realizing you no longer need to respond. You no longer need to defend your character. You no longer need to explain why you're walking away. You don't owe anyone a performance of your pain. You don't need to prove you were hurt. The woman who chooses silence has already cried the tears, already written the paragraphs that were never sent, already screamed into her pillow late at night when no one was around to hear. That was the real release. Everything after that is just noise, and she's done with noise. Silence is the mark of evolution. It says I've been through it, I felt it all, and now I'm done letting it control me. It says I've realized I don't need closure from anyone who didn't care enough to offer respect while I was still speaking. It says I've chosen to protect my peace, and I'll protect it even if it means walking away without another word. People often mistake a woman's silence for defeat. They think she's lost because she's no longer fighting. But what they don't realize is that silence isn't a loss. It's a decision, a choice to rise above, not to sink into the noise. A refusal to give more of herself to places that never gave her safety. She doesn't need to announce that she's healing. She just disappears and does it quietly, without fanfare, without needing an audience. There's a certain point in a woman's life when she realizes that not all attention is admiration. That being seen doesn't always mean being valued. And in that moment she starts choosing differently. She begins to value how she feels about herself over how someone else feels about her. She stops craving the spotlight of someone's temporary interest and starts nurturing the quiet fire of her self-respect. It's a shift, a powerful one. Because the truth is we're conditioned to believe that being noticed is the same thing as being loved. From a young age we're praised when we're pleasing, when we're beautiful, when we're accommodating. We're told that if someone is paying attention to us, it means we matter. But the reality is attention is cheap. It's impulsive. It can come from boredom, ego, or control. It doesn't require effort. It doesn't always reflect intent. And most of the time it fades just as quickly as it arrives. But self-respect, that's something entirely different. Self-respect is built brick by brick. Through every boundary enforced, every moment you say no when it would be easier to say yes. Through every time you walk away from someone who only loves the version of you that stays quiet, that tolerates, that bends to fit. Self-respect is when you stop measuring your worth by how much someone wants you, and start measuring it by how much you honor your own truth even when it's inconvenient. A woman who chooses self-respect is a different kind of powerful. She's not waiting to be chosen, she's already chosen herself. She's not flattered by breadcrumbs, she demands the whole meal. Not out of entitlement, but because she's finally learned what she brings to the table. And once you've tasted what it feels like to fully back yourself, to stand tall in your standards, you lose interest in anything that makes you shrink to fit. You see, attention can be manipulated. It can be given with strings attached. It can be used to keep you just close enough, but never close enough to feel secure. A compliment here, a message there, a sudden reappearance up. These are not signs of love, these are tactics. A woman who values attention over self-respect will keep coming back, mistaking crumbs for care. But the woman who's done that loop, who's exhausted by the cycle of highs and lows, she learns. She doesn't wait to be loved correctly. She corrects the story she's been telling herself. That story that said, if he pays attention to me, maybe I matter. No, she matters because she said so. Because she's decided her presence is a privilege, not a possession. And this kind of woman, the one who now honors her self-respect, doesn't play games. She doesn't need to post to be seen. She doesn't reply out of habit. She doesn't stay just to avoid being alone. She knows what loneliness feels like. And she also knows it's nothing compared to the loneliness of being with someone who makes you question your worth. Her self-respect doesn't make her arrogant. It makes her clear. Clear about what she will and won't accept. Clear about the difference between being desired and being valued. Clear that love without respect is just attention dressed up as devotion. Sometimes people think she's closed off, that she's too guarded, that she's hard to reach. But she's not hiding, she's protecting the version of herself she worked too hard to build. She's not bitter, she's just aware that the wrong kind of attention can distract her from the love she's meant to live, from the peace she's finally found, from the woman she's finally become. And the most beautiful part is, she no longer needs to be told she is beautiful to believe it. She no longer needs to be wanted to feel worthy. She no longer needs to be chosen to feel enough. She's already enough. And she carries that truth not on her lips, but in her posture, in her decisions, in the way she no longer settles for half-hearted anything. Healing doesn't begin with an apology. It doesn't begin with closure from the one who caused the wound. It doesn't come wrapped in someone's regret, or packaged in someone finally realizing what they lost. Healing is not a group project. It's not dependent on anyone else's growth, their recognition, or their return. Healing begins the moment a woman decides that she is no longer waiting for someone else to make it right. There's something deeply liberating in realizing that the pain someone gave you is not your lifelong burden to carry. It may have broken your heart, shaken your confidence, made you question your worth, but it doesn't get to define you. And no matter how much you wish they would see what they did, acknowledge it, fix it. Some people never do. Some people will live comfortably in denial, while you're left holding the peace. And that's when the real healing begins. When you stop looking outward and start turning inward. You can't heal through explanation. You can't heal through proving your pain. You can't heal through forcing someone to care. Healing is not about who hurt you, it's about who you become after the hurt. It's not about rewriting the past, it's about reclaiming your present. It's not about being hurt by them, it's about finally listening to yourself. Because there's a version of you that existed before the disappointment, before the betrayal, before the abandonment, and then there's the version of you that rose from it. And the space between those two versions, that's where the healing lives. Not in them realizing what they did, not in them saying sorry, but in you choosing not to bleed for someone who never once tried to stop your wounds. A woman who heals internally understands something powerful. That closure is a personal decision, not a joint discussion. She doesn't wait for someone to circle back. She doesn't hold her breath hoping they'll come with answers. She exhales. She lets it out. The pain, the questions, the longing. She lets it all go, without knowing what could have been said or done differently. She makes peace with not knowing, because healing requires acceptance, and sometimes that means accepting that you may never get the moment that makes it all make sense. She also learns that healing doesn't mean she doesn't still feel. It doesn't mean she never misses the good parts, or occasionally replays the memories. It means she stops assigning those feelings the power to undo her. It means she learns how to carry the weight without letting it crush, how to remember without relapsing, how to miss without returning. Healing happens in the everyday moments no one sees. In the way she starts smiling again, not because someone made her feel beautiful, but because she began to see beauty in herself, in the way she goes to sleep in silence and wakes up without the ache she used to carry like second skin, in the way she starts choosing herself in small, consistent ways, declining the call, closing the door, deleting the message she no longer needs to send. It's subtle, but it's there, a steady, slow rebuilding of trust with herself. And the truth is, healing is uncomfortable. It's lonely. It's not linear. Some days she'll feel on top of the world, and the next day she'll find herself staring at a photo, wondering what she did wrong. But the difference now is that she doesn't stay in those spaces. She visits them, she lets herself feel, and then she moves forward, always forward. She's no longer trying to fix the story. She's trying to write a new one. One where she's not the one being saved, but the one doing the saving for herself. Where her identity is not defined by who left, who stayed, who failed to show, but by who she became in their essence. The woman who heals internally stops making her pain a performance. She stops offering her scars as proof. She doesn't need someone else to see the damage to believe in her own recovery, because healing was never meant to be a mirror held up to someone else's eyes. It was always meant to be a mirror turned toward her own reflection. There is a quiet kind of confidence in a woman who doesn't chase, not because she doesn't care, not because she isn't capable of deep love, but because she understands the value of her energy, because she has learned, sometimes painfully, that chasing people, chasing validation, chasing love, always comes at the expense of herself, and she has decided she will no longer be the one running toward people who are standing still. She doesn't chase, she chooses. And that's not pride, that's self-preservation, that's growth. That's what happens when a woman stops seeking permission to be loved and starts realizing she is the permission, she is the standard, she is the decision. And that means love isn't something she begs for, it's something she curates, with intention, with clarity, with boundaries. You see, the world often tells women to be likable, to be agreeable, to smile, to soften. And in doing so, we are trained to reach for approval, even if it's from people who don't fully see us. We're told that love is earned through effort, that if we show them how loyal we are, how much we care, how patient we can be, then maybe, just maybe, they'll choose us back. But a woman who has lived through heartbreak knows the truth. You can pour everything into someone and still come up empty. You can give them your best and they can still walk away as if it meant nothing. And when that happens, enough times a shift occurs. She stops chasing, she reclaims her power, she stops proving she's enough and starts remembering that she already is. She learns that the right connection won't need convincing, that real love doesn't feel like running after someone who keeps looking over their shoulder. Real love meets you where you are. It doesn't require you to overextend or shrink. It doesn't ask for silence when you have something to say, or forgiveness when it hasn't been earned. She doesn't chase because she understands something now. Desperation is not devotion, overgiving is not intimacy, and attachment is not love. She's not interested in being chosen as a last resort or as a convenient option. She chooses deliberately, carefully, not out of fear but out of wisdom. The kind of wisdom that comes from learning to sit with her own silence and realizing she's not lonely. She's just finally listening to her own voice. She doesn't get swept up in chemistry anymore. She looks for alignment, for consistency, for emotional maturity, for someone whose actions speak without needing constant interpretation. She knows how to read between the lines now, and more importantly, she knows when not to. She no longer writes stories in her head to justify behavior that doesn't match her standards. She no longer turns red flags into potential. She sees what's in front of her, and if it doesn't serve her peace, she lets it go. Because she has nothing to prove. She is no longer trying to be enough for people who are unsure about her. She is enough for herself. And in that certainty, she becomes magnetic. Not because she's trying to be, but because people are drawn to a woman who knows she doesn't have to run after anyone. She sits in her worth like it's her natural state, because it is. When she walks into a room, she's not scanning for who will notice her. She's observing who deserves her time, her energy, her presence. Because her love is not free, it is not given blindly, it's not for sale to the highest bidder or the loudest voice. It's earned through respect, through care, Through consistency, she doesn't need to be chased either. She's not interested in games. She's not impressed by grand gestures with no follow-through. She's looking for real, for substance, for depth, because she's done the work. She's had the sleepless nights, the unanswered questions, the moments where she doubted everything and she got through them alone. She knows how to hold herself now, which means she'll never again settle for someone who can't meet her where she stands. She chooses calmly, firmly, without desperation, because she has finally become the kind of woman she used to chase after in others. And once a woman meets herself fully like that, she doesn't chase love, she attracts it by becoming it. There is a sacred kind of strength in a woman who chooses silence over pleading. Not the silence of defeat, but the silence of clarity, of finality, of strength that no longer needs to be explained or justified. It is not that she doesn't have something to say, it's that she has said it already, in every effort she gave, in every boundary she bent, in every time she tried to make someone understand. And now she's done explaining her worth to people who were committed to misunderstanding it. Her silence is not passive, it is powerful. It's the product of deep self-awareness, of a woman who has listened to herself enough to recognize when her words are being wasted. She no longer throws them into empty spaces, hoping they'll echo back with understanding. She no longer pleads for someone to love her the way she deserves, because the woman she has become knows that real love doesn't have to be begged for, and respect never comes from chasing. Once upon a time she did speak, she tried, she expressed, she explained herself, her pain, her perspective. She tried to bridge the gap between what she felt and what the other person refused to acknowledge. But words only work when both people are willing to listen. And when she realized she was speaking into silence, she stopped. Not because she didn't care, but because she cared too much to keep depleting herself in a space that offered no reciprocity. Silence for her became a boundary, a decision, a form of self-respect. It's not revenge, it's not coldness, it's clarity. And in a world that teaches women to over-express, to over-explain, to over-apologize, her silence becomes her rebellion. A statement that says, I've said enough, I've done enough, and now I choose peace over persuasion. Because pleading, that was a version of her that still believed she had to earn love. That if she just loved harder, tried harder, stayed longer, she could change the outcome. But love that asks for you to shrink, to beg, to lower your voice, or question your reality, that's not love, that's control dressed in confusion. And she doesn't live in confusion anymore. She's walked through the fire of heartbreak. She sat with the ache of not being heard. She stared at her phone hoping for a message that never came. And through it all she learned something invaluable. Her voice has power, and it deserves to be used where it's honored, not where it's ignored. So now her silence says everything. It speaks of lessons learned the hard way. It tells the story of a woman who has run out of excuses for other people's behavior. It echoes with the truth that she is not responsible for anyone else's growth, that she can't love someone into changing, that her energy is finite, and she will no longer spend it trying to fix what she didn't break. Her silence is not a game. It's not about making someone chase her. It's about choosing not to chase anymore. It's about recognizing that she is no longer interested in conversations that require her to sacrifice her dignity. That she's no longer trying to be the woman who makes it easy for someone to disrespect her twice. She has redefined closure. She has stopped waiting for someone to come back and make it right. She's realized the apology she needed most was the one she gave herself, for staying too long, for giving too much, for lowering her voice just to be heard. And now she's silent, not because she's given up, but because she's rising up. There's a quiet storm in her that no longer needs to erupt to prove its power. The silence she carries is not the absence of feeling, it's the presence of self, a self that is done justifying, explaining, defending, a self that is not available for half-hearted efforts or people who only show up when they feel her slipping away. This kind of silence is full of awareness, full of growth, full of truth that doesn't need to shout to be known. There's something poetic, almost tragic, about timing. How some people only see the light after it's no longer shining for them. How they remember the warmth of a woman after she's stopped reaching for them with open hands. When she finally lets go, when she finally turns the page, suddenly she becomes unforgettable. But not to herself, to him. He remembers her, not when she was pleading, not when she was showing up every day with love, with care, with devotion, not when she made herself soft enough to catch him every time he fell. He remembers her when she's already chosen to forget him. When the silence between them has grown louder than all the words she ever spoke, when she's no longer asking for anything, not love, not attention, not explanation, nothing. It's strange how memory works for some people. They don't notice you when you're pouring all of yourself into the relationship, into the connection, into the future you thought you were building together. They don't see you when you're standing right in front of them, waiting to be chosen, waiting to be seen. But the moment you shift your energy inward, when you stop investing in the story, when you stop rehearsing the same scenes in your mind, that's when you become real to them. Not in the way you needed when you were brave, but in the way that makes them realize they lost something rare, something powerful, something they thought would always. He remembers her laughter now, not because it's echoing in the room, but because it's absent. He remembers the way she loved him, not because she's still doing it, but because that kind of love doesn't come around often. He remembers her strength, her softness, her loyalty, all the things he took for granted while she was still offering them freely. But she doesn't need to hear it anymore. She's not looking back. You see, a woman doesn't truly forget from her memory. She forgets from her heart. That's a different kind of detachment. It's not forced, it's earned. Through heartbreak, through repetition, through the slow realization that no amount of loving someone can make them love you the way you deserve. So she lets go, not in anger, but in exhaustion. She forgets him in the way she stops checking if he's seen her message, in the way she no longer wonders if he thinks about her, in the way she chooses peace over the chaos of waiting. And that's exactly when he starts to remember. But by then she's not the same woman anymore. The version of her he misses doesn't exist in the same way. That version, the one who waited, hoped, stayed, she evolved. She's deeper now, stronger, calmer. She doesn't move from desperation, she moves from alignment. And in that alignment she doesn't circle back to what hurt her. She doesn't reopen doors that led to dead ends. He remembers her because memory plays tricks on those who didn't value presence. He replays the moment she gave him her best, not out of guilt, but out of realization. Out of the sudden awareness that she was triots, that the way she showed up was powerful, that her love wasn't ordinary. But now it's no longer his to receive. She's not bitter, she's not angry, she's just unavailable, in a way that can't be undone, emotionally close to what once trained her, spiritually guarded from the same patterns. She still wishes well, she still hopes he finds whatever it is he's looking for, but she's no longer hoping it's her. And so while he remembers her, with the clarity that only comes in absence, she forgets him in the quiet way that only healing knows. She forgets him in the peace she's created for herself, in the silence that used to ache, but now feels like home, in the joy she's learning to feel again, this time without needing someone else to spark it. In the strength that came, not from holding, but from finally letting go. She forgets him not because it didn't matter, but because she finally mattered to herself, more than the memory. Closure, that word held power over her for a long time. She thought it would come from an apology, a conversation, a mutual understanding that what happened between them had meaning, even if it couldn't last. She believed that in order to move on she needed us. She needed reasons. She needed him to look her in the eyes and tell her why it all unraveled the way. She wanted that final chapter, something conclusive, something that tied it all together. But life rarely gives us the endings we think we need. There came a point when she realized the waiting was breaking her more than the leaving it ever did, that every replayed every question that echoed in her mind wasn't helping her heal. It was keeping her trapped in a version of herself that still needed someone else to validate her pain. And that's when something shifted. Not overnight, not with one deep breath, but slowly, gently over time. She began to learn, maybe closure wasn't something you were given. Maybe it's something you claim. So she stopped searching for answers in someone who had already made the decision to walk away without giving it. She stopped romanticizing the idea that a final conversation would somehow erase The nights she cried herself to sleep, the anxiety that gloomed every time she saw his name, or the deep ache of knowing she gave her best to someone who never fully saw. She stopped believing that peace was something another person could have. And in that stopping, she began listening to herself again. She sat in the silence that used to terrify her. She stopped checking his updates, stopped rehearsing comebacks she'd never deliver, stopped imagining a moment that would never happen. And in the quiet, she started to hear something new. Her own voice, not the one filtered through pain for desperation, but the one she had silenced for too long. The one that always knew her worth. She began writing a new narrative, one that didn't end with heartbreak, but with awakening. She started to see the strength in her survival, the dignity in her detachment, the beauty choosing herself again. Day after day, even when the loneliness tried to convince her otherwise, she learned to sit with her pain instead of outsourcing it, to validate her experience without needing someone else to consign her emotions. Closure became something no longer a dialogue with another, but a deep reconciliation with herself. She forgave herself for staying too long, for hoping too much, for accepting less than she deserved. Not because she was weak, but because she because she wanted to believe in something that just wasn't built to last. And slowly she stopped needing She let go of the fantasy that he'd come back and right all the wrongs. Because it didn't. Healing only required her permission. So she gave herself closure in the way she chose to smile again. She wrote the final chapter of the story, not to prove anything to him, but to free herself from the loop of needing anyone else to complete her needs. Some endings are abrupt, silent, incomplete, and that's okay. The closure isn't in the goodbye, it's in the choice to stop waiting for one. It's in the decision to close the door yourself, to lock it, to walk away not in anger. She understood now that closure isn't always given. Sometimes it's created, forged through self-awareness, cemented in quiet acceptance, and lit up by the moment she realized she didn't need anyone else to validate what she already knew. Deep down that she is